You know that rule about not falling for your boss? I broke it. He was sharp, gruff, and honestly kind of terrible at people. But somewhere beneath the icy memos and midnight emails was a heart I couldn't ignore. This is how difficult became tender and real, for both of us. If this journey resonates, please like, subscribe, and share. Comment your thoughts. Your voice helps this channel support hearts everywhere. I work in Chicago at a sprawling hospital network on the north side. The kind of place with enough hallways to get lost in and cafeterias that smell like coffee and comfort food. My name is Alex, and I sit in the Communications and Strategy Suite, a floor that runs on timelines, talking points, and the quiet hum of printers. It's the place where we turn the hospital's beating heart into stories and plans, and where the smallest comma can start an argument. My boss, Grant, is the Senior Director of Strategy. If you asked anyone on day one what to expect from him, they'd say the same thing. Brilliant, unyielding, a little cold. If you asked me on day 30, I'd have said the same, but with an added, inconvenient confession I kept to myself. I couldn't stop noticing the way his attention sharpened the room, and how it sharpened me. The first time I presented a big plan to him, a rollout for a new telehealth service, he listened without a blink. He sat at the end of the long conference table, hands folded, jaw set. His questions were fast. He found a hole in my third slide, then another in my seventh. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He pointed with the end of his pen, precise and relentless. It stung. But when the meeting ended and the others filed out, he stayed and walked through the project with me, slowly, like a surgeon closing a wound. "You have the heart of it," he said. "Let's build the muscle." He drew boxes on a notepad and turned my scattered ideas into something with a spine. By the time we finished, the sting had softened into a kind of steady warmth I didn't know what to do with. In the hallway, I noticed the little details about him more than I should have. His tie was always tied perfectly, a practical Windsor. His sleeves were rolled to the same neat inch whenever he was deep into work, revealing strong forearms and a thin scar near his wrist that I never asked about. He kept his office tidy, except for the occasional stack of medical journals he insisted on reading to understand the work beyond spreadsheets. He wasn't a clinician, but he often spoke about patients as if he knew them personally. Never names, always stories. He set policies that protected them. He demanded accuracy, truth, and care, a combination that looks stern from the outside and feels like integrity when you get close enough to see it. I still thought he was a bad boss. Not in an unethical way, and not cruel, just not gentle. He did not believe in praise unless it was earned beyond doubt. If he caught a mistake, he circled it in red and slid the paper back without softening adjectives. Emails came after 10 p.m. sometimes. He'd write, "Need your eyes on this," and attach a document full of comments. There were Mondays that felt like steep hills and Fridays that felt like exams. It made people whisper about him. Some called him perfectionistic. A manager down the hall rolled her eyes and mimicked his clipped tone over lunch one day. I sipped my water and stayed quiet. I knew that I felt something for him that complicated my fairness, and the fairness mattered. I told myself to watch, to learn, to do my job well, to keep my heart in its lane. My father lives in Pilsen, and he's had a heart that's worked hard for decades. He drove buses. He raised me with sturdy hands and quiet humor. His doctor, a gentle cardiologist with kind eyes, told us to watch the salt, to watch the stress, to walk when the weather was good. When I visited him on weekends, we took slow strolls down 18th Street, stopping for coffee at a little place that roasts beans so dark they smell like chocolate. I would tell him about work in broad strokes, careful not to mention names. He would nod and say, "Do your best. Be fair." He never told me how to love. He only ever told me how to live. It was enough to make me dream carefully about what could be, if it ever could be. With the boss, I called difficult, and secretly watched for like a lighthouse at night. If you've ever had a difficult boss, you know the feeling. Heart quickening when you see their name on your screen, a ripple of, "What now?" across your shoulders. When you layer attraction on top of that, it becomes a private storm. You keep your face steady in meetings. You keep your tone professional. You take your lunch at a different table even though you want to stay and listen to him talk about the opioid outreach program we're launching. Because when he speaks about harm reduction, he softens, just slightly like he's remembering someone. I noticed the way he'd pause when a patient's family stopped him in the hallway to ask for directions, and how he would walk them all the way to the desk instead of pointing. I noticed, because I was looking, there's a line in our employee handbook that is written in plain, responsible words. If you are in a direct reporting relationship, you may not date. The policy is there to protect fairness, protect people from pressure or favoritism, and to prevent the kinds of misunderstandings that harm teams and trust. I knew that. I respected it. I still believe in it. So when, late one evening during a snowstorm that pressed white against the hospital windows, Grant and I ended up stuck in the office with a crisis brewing, a rumor online about a piece of equipment that had never been used on patients but sounded scary when framed by fear, we worked together until midnight, quietly side by side. He drafted, I edited, we checked with legal and the chief medical officer and sent a clear, calming message to the community. When we exhaled, the building was hushed. He leaned back in his chair and rubbed his eyes. "You did good work tonight," he said. I said, "You did too." Then I made myself laugh, because it felt safer to make a joke than to sit in the silence with the gratitude in his gaze. "You're not always this agreeable," he smiled. The smile surprised me, not because I didn't think he could smile, but because it reached all the way to his eyes. "I know I have a reputation," he said. "It keeps us honest. Sometimes I lean on it too hard." "Sometimes?" I said softly, and he listened to the softness. His voice dropped like he was careful not to disturb the quiet in the building. He told me that he grew up in a small town in Ohio, that his mother worked nights as a nurse and put herself through school while raising him, that his father left when he was 12. He said that somewhere along the way he decided that control would protect people. He learned deadlines like other kids learned sports. He learned to keep the floor clean because that's where he did his homework when his mom came home too tired to clear the table. "I'm not easy," he said. "But I try to be fair. I felt the ache of my attraction turn into something tenderer. I told him about my dad's heart and the way we walk on Sundays. I told him how sometimes holding a list of tasks is easier than holding a feeling that could break your day in half." He nodded, like he understood the way lists can be a life raft. Then he stood, found 2 paper cups, and poured us decaf from the machine down the hall. I held the cup between my palms and thought, don't cross a line. Admire the view, respect the fence, but hearts, as you know, are not fences. They are doors that open with the right key, or sometimes with the gentle persistence of someone knocking kindly. Over the next few weeks, I saw small changes in him. He started leaving notes in the margins of my drafts when he asked for changes. "Good framing here. Strong start. Thoughtful." He didn't do it often, which made it mean more. He asked how my dad was doing. He told me his mother's Parkinson's was getting worse, and he was flying to Cleveland on Fridays to take her to appointments. He said that sometimes he worried about who would sit with her when she felt tremors of fear. I told him about a support group our hospital offered. He listened. He wrote down the time. He went. Some nights, I'd leave the building and step into the cold dark of Chicago winter and walk past the L stop at Montrose, where the platform hums in a way that feels like a lullaby for a tired city. I'd think about the line we weren't supposed to cross and the honest desire that kept tapping at my ribs. I reminded myself of the ethics. Power dynamics matter. Consent matters. Fairness to the team matters. Love, to be love, has to respect the people around it. If you're listening to this and you feel that tug towards someone who can sign your performance review, I want you to hear me carefully. Your feelings are not wrong. Your choices are what shape the story. I decided to treat my feelings as information, not instruction. It made the waiting tender instead of unbearable. Spring arrived as if someone turned a dial. The snow melted into slush, and then into little lakes along the curb. The hospital courtyard sprouted hyacinths that made the air sweet if you leaned down to greet them. I had been at the network for almost 2 years. I had earned enough trust to run pieces of projects without seeing every correction mark from Grant's pen. He was still precise, but he had widened the circle around how things could be done. On a Tuesday afternoon, my phone buzzed. It was my neighbor from the second floor, Mr. Jenkins, a retired math teacher with a voice like a radio host. He rarely called. He usually waved from his window or knocked on my door to ask if I wanted extra soup. When I answered, his words came out rushed. "Alex, I'm okay, but the paramedics are here. I got a little dizzy." I told my supervisor I needed to step out, and I jogged the few blocks to our building. Mr. Jenkins was sitting in a chair, an oxygen mask fogging slightly with his breath. He tried to make a joke about getting the grand tour of an ambulance. The EMTs were calm, competent, kind. They asked questions with that steady cadence that reassures without minimizing. I rode with him to the ED. On the way, I texted Grant that I was out for the rest of the day. He wrote back quickly, "Do what you need. Keep me posted if you want." I didn't owe him updates on my personal life, but it felt like telling a friend. Hours passed. Tests, fluids, the slow dance of triage. It turned out to be dehydration and a medication mix-up. He would be okay. I sat by his bed until his niece arrived. When I finally headed home, exhausted and grateful, I found a message from Grant. "Hope your neighbor is stable. If you need a ride or want a hot meal, say the word." The offer was simple, but it landed with the weight of care. I said yes to the food and no to the ride. He stopped by my place with soup and a bag of groceries. He didn't come in. He stood in the hallway wearing a navy zip-up instead of a suit, looking softened by the day. He asked about Mr. Jenkins and listened to my updates like they mattered because they did. When he left, I put the groceries away and leaned on the counter and let myself feel the small, radiant beam of being seen. Of course, everyone notices when a boss starts showing unusual concern for someone. I do not recommend trying to be discreet in a building filled with people who notice everything. But because we were careful, because our conversations remained about work inside those walls, there was little to notice except a slight kindness in emails and two people who walked to the parking lot at similar times. We were quiet and we were trying, and we still had not named the thing between us. The naming happened because of honesty and policy. After a quarterly review where he pushed me hard and then signed off with excellent progress overall, he asked if I would talk with him for a moment after everyone left. It was a Friday. The sun had found its way into the gray office and made the floors look warmer than they usually do. He closed the door, then sat, hands folded, eyes clear. "I care about you," he said. "I don't say that to people I supervise. I can't pretend I don't feel it. And I can't ignore the policy. If we ever named this, even on the quiet, I would become a worse version of myself. And I wouldn't do that to you or to the team." I felt both relief and grief, and then a surprising steadiness. "I care about you too," I said. "I don't want to break anything to get to it. I want it to be clean. We are raised on movies that tell us love is fire that turns rules to ash. But in real life, fire can warm or destroy depending on what you feed it." We decided to feed ours with patience. We went to HR together the next week. We sat with Megan, who has the kind of calm that feels like a soft chair. We told her the truth. She listened. She explained the policy in full sentences, not legal jargon. She said that in order to date, one of us would need to move to a different reporting line, preferably a different team. The organization could explore a transfer for me, since my skills were broad and my work was strong. She warned us that gossip travels and that the process would be slow because the hospital had rolling projects and budgets that sometimes moved like ships through syrup. Then she thanked us for being transparent. Her gratitude made it feel less like we were sneaking and more like we were tending to something valuable. I applied for an internal transfer to community partnerships, a team that worked with neighborhood clinics and local organizations to make care more reachable. It felt like a good fit. My heart already leaned toward telling stories that bridge the hospital to the streets people actually live on. The months between application and outcome were long. They were careful, too. We did not date. We did not go to dinner. We did not linger at each other's doors. We kept our conversations about projects and patients and the weather, and then we went home. On one of those evenings, I visited my dad. He was sitting at the table with a crossword puzzle in front of him, pretending to be stuck so I would sit and find the answers with him. He looked at me the way fathers do when they know something is both right and hard for their kid. "You're doing the right thing," he said. The right thing is usually slower. He told me about the time he waited 3 years to ask my mom to move in with him because she was finishing nursing school. Because her focus mattered, because their timing mattered. "We were both grown," he said. "Grown folks choose timing like they choose a good chair. It holds you. I stayed late, helping him pack a pillbox for the week. We folded laundry. The home things steady the heart when the waiting gets loud. Grant did not become a different man because he was in love, and I did not expect him to. He still sent late emails now and then, but he started scheduling them for the morning. He still expected excellence, but he started asking for it with a tone that felt like an invitation instead of a command. He apologized once to a coordinator for snapping during a tense call. I saw the way the apology softened the air around them. People surprised me by surprising themselves with how much they could forgive when opinions were clear and egos lowered. It reminded me that even bad bosses are often people who want to protect something and are learning new ways to do it. The transfer offer came on a Tuesday. Megan called me to her office and smiled before she spoke. "Community Partnerships has a spot," she said. "They're thrilled." I felt the answer travel through me like a sunrise. It meant a different workload, different goals, different meetings. It meant stepping away from the table where I had learned to sharpen my ideas. It also meant possibility. I accepted. We put a transition plan in motion that lasted 6 weeks. There were practicalities, files to hand off, contacts to introduce, a desk to clean. And there was the matter of telling the team. We were transparent without oversharing. We said I had been offered an internal opportunity and was excited to serve our community partners. Everyone nodded. Someone brought cupcakes. Someone else hugged me and whispered, "You're going to be amazing over there." On my last day in Grant's chain of command, we met with Megan one more time and signed papers that represented both ethics and hope. The policy had boxes and signatures. It did not say love anywhere on it, but it might as well have in the small space between our names. When we walked out of HR, we did not touch. We stood by the elevator, 2 people who had made room for something to begin safely. He said, "Dinner Friday?" I said, "Yes." Then we went back to our offices and answered emails. Like adults do, because the rest of life does not stop for your heart just because it is full. Our first date was at a small restaurant in Uptown with soft lighting and a server who recommended the salmon like she was giving you advice about the weather. We sat across from each other, no laptops, no agendas. He was not my boss anymore. He was a man who had worn a lot of armor and was trying to find out how it felt to loosen a strap. I was a man who had been careful for a long time and was now letting his breath move all the way down into his belly. We talked about everything that didn't make it into work emails. Favorite books. He loved James Baldwin. Favorite places. I loved the lake at dawn. Things we were afraid of? He was afraid of disappointing people who depended on him. I was afraid that my kindness would look like softness in a world that rewards sharp edges. We said these things with our hands wrapped around warm ceramic mugs. When the server set down dessert, 2 spoons, 1 plate, he reached across the table and held my hand for the first time. It felt like opening a window in a room I didn't know had grown stuffy. When you take care of something new, you do it the way you would take care of a recovering patient. You watch for signs. You communicate, you hydrate, you rest. We did that with each other. We set boundaries. We decided we would not talk about his old team unless I needed mentoring. We chose to tell our close friends and families early, so we didn't spend energy hiding. He flew to Ohio every other weekend to see his mom, and I took the early train to Pilsen on Sundays to have coffee with my dad. We met in the middle for dinners that felt both easy and like a miracle. My dad met Grant on a bright Saturday. We were careful not to make it a test, but of course it felt like one. We sat in my dad's small kitchen where the fridge is covered in magnets shaped like states. Grant offered to chop vegetables. He did it like someone who has boiled down his life to small rituals that make hard days bearable. My dad asked him about work. He asked him about his mother. He asked him if he liked baseball. Grant said he liked the social part more than the game. My dad laughed and said, "Good. We'll just talk during the innings." When we left, my dad hugged him. Later, in the car, Grant let out a breath and said, "Your father is a wise man," I said. "He learned it the slow way." Grant squeezed my hand and said, "That's the real way." A relationship does not earn trust once. It earns it with repetition. There were days when his old habits tugged at him, like when he would get frustrated at an email and want to fire back 6 bullet points with bolded words. He would draft the response and then show it to me not as his editor, but as his person. I would read it and say, "What do you want them to feel after reading this?" He would pause and soften the edges. He started asking himself that question without me, too. And there were days when my worry would rise like a tide for no reason other than that love makes you brave and bravery makes you aware of how much there is to lose. On those days, he would text me in the afternoon with a simple sentence. Steady. It became our check-in word. It meant I'm here. It meant we're doing the slow right thing. I started my new job and fell in love with the way community work slows the pace of an institution and forces it to listen. I met pastors who knew their congregation's health secrets better than any chart. I met a librarian who hosted screenings for diabetes education because she knew who would show up if the doors were open. I met a teenager who volunteered to translate at his grandmother's clinic because the clinic had stood by their family through 3 generations. I came home tired and bright. I told Grant stories that were mine to tell, and he listened like it mattered because it did. He told me about a presentation to the board that went better than he expected, and I listened and made him tea. Some months into this new life, a real crisis came. Not a rumor. Not a miscommunication. A serious issue with a vendor that required public statements and internal audits, and the kind of clear-eyed communication that can hold a team together when headlines pull at it. The stakes were high. The temptation to revert to the old bad boss was high, too. I watched from my new seat, proud and nervous. I saw him insist on accountability without shame. I saw him protect a frontline nurse from being dragged into a press scrum. I saw him say, "I don't know," in a meeting full of people who pretended they did. And then I saw him do something that changed the way his staff looked at him. He stood up in a meeting, thanked the most junior person who had raised a question that ended up saving us hours, and gave her the credit in writing. After the meeting, he sent a note to HR asking how to make sure she was recognized in a lasting way. He was not trying to impress me. He didn't know I'd hear about that part. He was different because he was choosing to be, one choice at a time. Love changes our muscles. It teaches them to tense where necessary, to relax where possible. It reminded him that leadership is not a performance of strength, but a practice of service. It reminded me that my care was not weakness. It was skill. And it asked us to grow, not for each other, but with each other. We took a trip to Cleveland in the fall to see his mother together. By then, her tremors were more pronounced, but her eyes were still sharp with humor. Her hair was white and lovely. She looked at me like she was measuring my kindness and my steadiness. After dinner, when he went to the kitchen to grab more tea, she took my hand. She said, "He is hard on himself. He always has been. Be gentle when he is not." I said, "I will." She nodded once, satisfied, and started telling me stories about him as a child, how he organized his toy cars by color, how he slept curled up like he was protecting his chest. Love is a lineage in ways you don't expect. It passes through the way someone pours your coffee and the way they tell you to put on a warmer sweater before you leave. It passes through the warning that sounds like a blessing. There was a night that could have become a bad ending for us if we had let it. We were at a fundraiser for a clinic we both cared about. It was in a glassy building downtown. He looked good in his suit, and I felt good in mine. We had told the people in our circle about us, and word had trickled where it would. A board member with more money than tact leaned in and said, "So this is the guy from your team, huh? Must be nice to have pull." It was said with a smirk, a nasty little hook. The old version of Grant might have gotten sharp. The new version paused long enough for the moment to feel a bit awkward. Then he said evenly, "We're together, and we followed policy because my team deserves fairness. If you're curious about the process, HR is great at explaining it." The board member laughed it off and found someone else to impress. Grant turned to me, eyes steady, and said, "Are you okay?" I was. Not because the comment didn't sting, but because it didn't land. The truth had made us solid. We grew. We had easy Tuesdays and hard Wednesdays and long Sundays. We learned how to argue kindly. He would sometimes fall into silence when stressed. I would poke, trying to help, and he would feel it as pressure. We learned a better dance. He learned to say, "I need a night to think." I learned to say, "I'm here when you're ready." We ate breakfast in socks. We bought grocery store flowers. We met halfway across the living room and kissed like the first time every time. When the light hit the floor just right, I would watch him read and think I could live 7 lifetimes right here and not get bored. A year after our first dinner, we walked by the lake at dusk. The air was cool and smelled like water and even a bit of rain, though the sky was clear. The city hummed behind us. He took my hand and said, "I keep thinking about what I want my life to feel like." I asked him what words he had. He said, "Steady, honest, useful, loved." I said, "Me too." He stopped, faced me fully, and said, "I'm not your boss and haven't been for a long time, but I will always be the man who asks you for your thoughts before making a big decision. Would you live with me?" I said yes. It felt like agreeing to a plan that fit, room for room. I moved in January. We made a home out of 2 sets of habits. We scrapped extra mugs and kept the ones with comforting weight. We donated clothes that didn't feel like our future. We taught each other our small preferences like songs. He likes the bed made as soon as we get up. I like the kettle filled before we go to sleep. We made a list on the fridge for who would call his mom and who would call my dad each week. Not because we needed to schedule love, but because we wanted to treat it with respect. If you are listening because you have fallen for someone you shouldn't, know this: the feeling itself doesn't make you a villain. The story you write with it is where your character shows. We only get so many big loves. It's worth asking them to be honest. We didn't get everything right. We got a lot of things slow. We prioritized ethics because we wanted to be able to sit at a table with the people who depend on us and know we had not used them as cover. That matters. It matters to your team. It matters to your sleep. It matters to your future self. We never called him a bad boss again. He was a good boss who used to be bad at kindness. Now he's good at it sometimes and learning the rest. He still sends emails at odd hours now and then. He still likes his tie at the same knot. He still gets a look on his face when a plan comes together that makes me want to kiss him. The difference is that he knows there is more than one way to protect people. He knows that gentleness is not a luxury. It's a method. And I know that my heart can love with both caution and courage, and that the rules aren't there to rob me of love. They're there to help me bring love into the world without breaking what's around it. Last week, my dad called and asked if we wanted to come over for stew. He had found a new spice at the bodega and wanted to see what it did to beef and carrots. We sat in his living room, bowls on our knees, and watched a baseball game we barely followed. During a commercial, my dad looked at Grant and said, "You're different from the first stories I heard about you." Grant nodded, unoffended, honest. "I was a little too sharp," he said. "I think I was scared." My dad nodded and said, "Fear makes a poor boss." Then he smiled at me and added, "But it can make a wise man if you let it teach you." We ate in contented silence for a while. The game continued. The dogs barked down the street. Life's ordinary music played. Before we left, my dad hugged us both and slipped me a Tupperware container of stew. He said, "Call me when you get home." We did. It was late by the time we put the dishes in the sink and turned off the lights. We got into bed. In the dark, Grant reached for my hand, as he always does, like a nightly promise. He said one word. "Steady," I said it back. The word felt like more than a habit. It felt like a record of what we had chosen, again and again, when we could have chosen differently. If you're out there and this story sounds like yours, I want to remind you gently that your heart is wise, and you are allowed to give it good counsel. You can love someone and still say not yet. You can love someone and still ask for process. You can love someone and still say, "Let's ask HR together. Let's wait. Let's move teams. Let's choose clean." That kind of love is slow, yes, but slow is a kind of strong. It's the kind that lasts long enough to become your life. Months from now, someone will ask us how we met, and we will exchange a look that says more than words. We will say, "We worked together." We will say, "We waited." And maybe we'll say, "We learned that hard doesn't always mean hurtful." And that kindness is a skill you can practice until it's your nature. If no one asks, we will still know it. We will carry it into our mornings and our email drafts and our dinners and our care for the people who raised us. There's a bench by the lake where we sometimes sit, winter or summer, watching the water pretend it's the ocean. The bench has a small plaque that says, "For everyone who kept trying." We didn't buy that plaque, but the words feel like a piece of our story. We kept trying. We kept it clean. We didn't make heroes out of rule breaking. We made heroes out of showing up. 2 men, one used to being called a bad boss, and the other used to thinking love has to hurt a little to count. learning together that love can be steady, honest, useful, and full. We still send each other the occasional late message, just one word now. Home. And that is exactly where we are.